Welcome to the Clean Hits Hockey podcast, and hello to Utah Mammoth fans as well as any Chicago Blackhawks fans who might be joining us for this special edition of Future Face-Off, where I'm going to be going head-to-head with some of the best prospect analysts the game has to offer, and pitting our beloved Utah Mammoth up against the favorite team of those analysts. Last week, we had Rocco Zappia representing the Ottawa Senators. And this week, we are very happy to welcome back to the show Anthony, the prospect Don Donati, representing the Chicago Blackhawks. How are you, Anthony?
I'm good. I really like this idea. I think it's fantastic. I think that more, just like teams should be doing this because it is fun. And I think this is going to be a good one because there's a lot of good prospects between these two pools.
Absolutely, there sure is. Yeah, the Chicago Blackhawks and the Utah Mammoth have both taken a little bit of a different path to get where they are. Chicago's obviously not relocating anytime soon, but both teams have been rebuilding for quite a while. Maybe a little too long, maybe not long enough, depending on your perspective. But a lot of losing, a lot of rough times have led to brighter days ahead for both organizations, right? So I think that Utah is probably a little bit closer to turning the corner, but Chicago cut a little bit deeper and may have some more shiny objects at the top of the pool there, especially when it comes to the 23U group. So for those of you who missed our mock draft episode with the prospect Don, I wanted to reintroduce him. The Don here, Anthony, has burst onto the prospect analyst scene. He's on just about every great prospect podcast, any draft broadcast that you're a fan of. You'll see Anthony on it. And he's a longtime Chicago Blackhawks fan. So, Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit of how you got into the prospect game and what's made you a Blackhawks fan and what that experience has been like?
Well, it was easy to be a Blackhawks fan because I grew up when it was the 2010s. So first off, Kane had his first win with the goal against Philly when he was 21. And I think a lot of people forget that 21 years old. I can't imagine winning a Stanley Cup, getting the game-winning goal in overtime as a 21-year-old. Like, that would have been absurd party at just like everything that you dream of. So it was pretty easy to get into hockey. And I think it was just the golden standard. A lot of people didn't really grow up as hockey fans in other states, but in Chicago, it was like a huge thing. Like, if you weren't a hockey fan, like, what were you doing? Like, my grandfather and grandfather's grandfather, like, they were all hockey fans. It was just like in our blood. And Chicago gets cold enough that when you are at the park or whatever, the park district, they freeze the ice. So you can just skate with your friends and you just go to like your local park and there's going to be an ice rink and it's going to be free skating. They put pucks on. So everybody was always a Blackhawks fan. So that was kind of easy. I couldn't imagine the Blackhawks relocating. I think there'd be pitchforks wherever they make decisions in Chicago or whatever happened with Arizona. But if that ever happened, like, I would be very sad.
Not
But
a chance.
yeah, it would be crazy. But to be on the scene has been like very surreal. I've had a lot of people take me under their wing. I've gotten the opportunity to do some pretty cool stuff that I've always dreamed of, like interviewing prospects. Like Matthew Schaefer was like my first Zoom call prospect, which was kind of surreal because then he went number one. He wasn't supposed to at the time, but fast forward, he had an incredible season. But it was like a lot of little wins, and then it kind of built up to where I get to do this all the time now. And I got to go to like the draft, the combine, talk to like 90 plus prospects. And I think that you just start learning new things about the space. It's not like an average business where people are just trying to squeeze out a dollar or trying to push ahead of you, or it's not as competitive as I am used to. So it's really great space. I feel like everybody's out there to try to help each other, which is a lot better than other sports, or even it's like a close-knit community, which I really do like with the scouting community and the hockey community. So they've opened me they've welcomed me with open arms, and I just appreciate going on everything I can just to talk about hockey, because I was the guy that was staying up till 3 a.m. watching random YouTube videos on hockey
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So now I got to talk about it. It's a real dream and it's surreal.
Yeah, and we're new to the podcasting game too, Anthony. I've been, a big prospect nerd my whole life. I was telling you
Yeah.
before the show that I've watched every draft since '96, and I've been really into it for quite a while. And I've been watching shows like Blue Chip Prospect, and I've been a big Rocco Zappia fan, and I was watching the
Hmm.
Puck Bunker and watching NHL Draft Pros and a lot of these different podcasts that I'm a big fan of. And yeah, last season, all of a sudden, here's the prospect
Yeah.
on all of them, right? So I'm like, oh man, look at this guy. He's a new face on the scene, which is great to see. And your analysis has been great. And I think Utah fans, that TJ Ginla draft, just it came so quick after the
Hmm.
relocation that I don't think they really knew what hit them. So I think last season was kind of their first foray into really following the draft. I think draft coverage was pretty new to the team this summer. So I think maybe they got into it a little bit later with this Caleb Desnoyers draft. And I think that setting up the 2026 draft is going to be really their first opportunity to really nerd out. So
Hmm.
Utah Mammoth fans, definitely follow the prospect follow his YouTube channel, check out every podcast he's on, because you provide really great insights. And as this is kind of their first opportunity to really follow the draft from tip to tail, I think, definitely tune into the Prospect On's content. You're going to learn a lot as you become a draft nerd and get ready for the next class. Speaking of that 2026 class, I think Utah is going to be picking a little bit later than they have the last couple, right? Arizona was still in the thick of the rebuild, headed into that TJ Ginla draft and picked sixth overall, right around where we all kind of expected that they would be picking that year. This last draft, in the Caleb Desnoyers draft, obviously we expected to be picking much later and would have been picking 14th overall if not for some lottery luck that we never got to enjoy in Arizona. But we moved up and were able to select Caleb Desnoyers. And I think that this upcoming season, Utah is probably going to pick even later than 14th overall, would be my guess. Maybe even picking outside of the lottery as a playoff team potentially. Now, Chicago's a little further away than that, I think. Before we dive into the pools, I think with Utah, we're going to expect that whoever we add is probably going to be a little bit lower on our list. That may not be
Hmm.
true for Chicago. Where are you anticipating Chicago's going to probably end up next draft day?
Well, Utah is going to be in the playoff race. The Blackhawks are going to be in the McKenna race. And
Yeah.
I'm completely fine with that. Like, it is very early on in this rebuild. I think that if the Blackhawks would have gotten Bedard like last year instead of 2 years ago, it would have been a lot better for Bedard because he has to withstand a lot as well as the rookie contracts. But Kyle Davidson has been known to burn years because you are signing a player for less value than they are because they can't establish themselves. So there is upside to doing that. Like Connor Bedard's contract might not, you know, take that big of like a pay cut, but the thing is like it's a rising cap, so maybe getting him a year early is actually a blessing in disguise because the Blackhawks are not in any rush to get into contention. Not like any rush to get into contention, but you don't want a scenario where you're bringing up these prospects too early. I think they took the Utah Hockey Club kind of model where you want to bring up players like a year after they're ripened, not a year before.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. It's exciting to see a prospect play in their first couple games, maybe first 4 or 5. You saw Jet Luchenko do the same thing with the Flyers. You can go on and on. I mean, Artem, like Lev Shinov, Renzel, they got a couple games. Same with Oliver Moore. So it's nice to see that, but you don't really want to rush them like you did with Korchinski because Korchinski now is not eligible for this list because he played 54 games, but he was like a minus 48 or whatever it was. And that
Hmm.
just kind of destroys a guy's confidence when you don't have the size as well as the frame. I mean, Korchinski had the size, but I'm talking about like the muscle as well as a player is fighting for an NHL contract. It's his job. He's going to see that the Blackhawks are a bottom 2-3 team anyway. When we have a guy like Korchinski out there that isn't really knowing what he's supposed to do out there, and he is stuck in his zone a lot because the Blackhawks are stuck in their zone, so he can't really play offensively, it's going to hurt them. So the Blackhawks aren't in any situation to try to do that again. So it's going to be bottom 5 finish again. I would be very surprised if it wasn't. I would want the Blackhawks to be the 11th seed and then win number 1 of like the
Yeah.
Islanders kind of did, or close to it. But the thing is, like, that doesn't happen often. So I feel like a bottom 3 finish in this class would be fantastic for the Blackhawks. Not to say I'm a hater of a fan. I just think that from the rebuild perspective, the Blackhawks are nowhere close to where they need to be. Another year after, then you see guys that kind of come out of nowhere, like Lardis Canceros coming in 2026, 27, who's in Russia, who's killing it in the KHL. Nestrasil is going to be a year into UMass, see what he develops. Like Mason West is going to graduate high school after next year because he's a senior right
Yeah.
now. He didn't even know it was his draft year. So I feel like it's one of those cases where you want to make sure these guys are ready when you bring them up, because you don't want a instance where you're not. I mean, I think of Logan Cooley all the time when he was actually going to stay in Minnesota or play for the Golden Gophers again. But then they talked him out of it. They told him the plan, but he was there for, I think, like 2 years, and maybe he was going to go for his third. So I always think of that because Oliver Moore was going there and he was going to be the 2C. But then since Logan Cooley left, he had to go to play, I still think 2C, but his role in the offseason was 1C, but it just obviously didn't work out. But you have guys that you took your time with, as well as like a guy like JJ Paterka. Like, I think Utah, when you made that move, it solidified that you will be going for a playoff spot. And also, I have no idea how you guys got him for that cheap of a price, because no,
Yeah.
I was talking to Coach Petey, and he was obviously a big component into Arizona Coyotes fandom, and he was talking about how it was a good trade because you have 2 underrated players. But I just don't understand how you don't even get a pick swap for the 4-9. Like, obviously, Sabres had the 9th pick and they took Merca, but there's a huge difference between a Radim Merca in that area, even though he's 6'6", right-handed defenseman that can skate and is really good. And I loved our conversation, but Desnoyers is a different type of prospect. He's a different tier of prospect. So it was interesting to see that the Utah Mammoth still got that value there and the 4th pick when you got Paterka. So they're doing it correctly. Samashev's going to come up. Boot's going to come up. Really like everybody that you guys have taken recently. So I think that it's going to be McKenna race for us, playoff race for you guys.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's a good transition, right? Talking about Caleb Desnoyers. What a unexpected boon that was. And I shared this on the last podcast, but when I was watching the draft lottery and
Mm,
saw that we won
yeah.
4th overall, I wasn't even watching the live broadcast because the results were so slim. I was just kind of looking at the live results, right? And when I
Mm-hmm.
saw that we moved up to 4, and my podcast buddy Clean Hits Kenny texted me, he said number 4, I jumped out of my chair in my office. Luckily, it was after hours and nobody was there. And I jumped up and I said, Desnoyers, right? This was the
Yeah.
kid that
Really?
I was really hoping to
Wow.
get at number 4. That was the first name that came to my mind, that Desnoyers, this kid that I really had fallen in love with watching all season. I thought we had a realistic shot at and didn't believe that we did before. And he is a different tier of prospect, I think, than Radim Merca or anyone we could have
Yeah.
had at 14. But he's not probably a different tier of prospect than Artem Levshunov, who I believe you have first on your list for the Chicago
Mm-hmm.
Blackhawks. Why don't you tell Utah Mammoth fans a little bit about Artem Levshunov, and then we can kind of talk about where he might compare head to head to Caleb Desnoyers.
Well, I think that there's like a tier based in the Blackhawks prospect pool where it's any one of Levshunov, Frondell, and Rinzel. And the thing is, I did value based for like Levshunov, even though I think Frondell might be more skilled and is better fit for the Blackhawks for superstar potential. Like, if you have a probability, I think Frondell's would be a lot higher. I know in Byron Bader's prospect hockey prospecting model, he actually has an 86% rate of a star, and that's like one of the highest he's ever recorded.
Mhm.
So when I think of Frondell, I think of more like superstar or, second line center, which is really high floor. But the thing with Levshinov is just his pure upside of a right-handed defenseman that has that aggressive nature to shoot 10 shots a game. I mean, there was 3 games this season on the Blackhawks where he had over 6 shots, which made no sense because he wasn't really showing up on the score sheet. He was just throwing the puck to the net. So I like that aggressiveness on this Blackhawks team that did activate their defense a lot this season. But the thing with Levshinov is he went from, like Belarus to Green Bay Gamblers to Michigan State, then Rockford and Blackhawks all in 3 years. That you don't really see that. So that type of growth, I think, kind of makes him a lot more of a upside play as well. I would have still went with Ivan Demidov. I know that I'm like going to make fans upset that I'm bringing it up again, but I think Ivan Demidov would have been fantastic if you were scouting for the next couple of years. You already knew you had Sam Renzel, who you drafted out of high school and was already trending to be a really good player at 6'5", 6'6", right-handed defenseman with offensive upside. You knew that he could potentially be a top 4. I mean, more than a top 4 defenseman for you, but kind of locked in that floor of top 4. And then obviously he jumped up to being the number 1 defenseman probably on this roster next to Vlasic next year. He's going to be the top pair. I mean, Renzel came out to be the Blackhawks best player in those 9 games that he was playing. Like, it was like without a doubt. I went to go watch one live against him and Cale Makar and Nathan McKinnon, and Renzel and Makar looked like the 2 best players on the ice. It was really interesting. I mean, Makar scored to tie the game up with 10 seconds left and had 30 goals. So he got 2 goals to get 30, but it was just like a different level of like Levshinov was not the same player that Renzel was those first few games, but also Renzel was drafted in 2022. So there is a level of you're already polished a little more. But with
Mhm.
Levshinov, I think that I think that like Desnoyers is probably in the Frondel tier, where Frondel might be a little bit better upside wise, but Desnoyers is better 2-way center. I think he's going to be a Selke Award winner. I think he's like Jonathan Toews-esque light version because Jonathan Toews didn't really show up in the stat sheet a lot, but the thing what he was doing was he was a pure winner and winning Stanley Cups at a very young age. So I think that like Desnoyers isn't like that. Like it's like different, but when you're being compared to Jonathan Toews stylistically, as well as the role on your team, you're getting an incredible player. I've always liked Desnoyers, and I think the one thing is that he had the 2 wrist injuries that now he needs surgery for at 12
Yeah.
weeks, which that does not mean anything because like these players are 17, 18 years old. It's not like you're drafting them as NFL players where if you're missing 12 weeks right after the draft, like it would be a little bit like a concern because you're 24, 25, or 23 to 25 or whatever it is. So hockey injuries when you're this age doesn't really do anything for me and like a raise my eyebrow because he was already going to torch the league and where he is. It's just
Mhm.
going to take him a little more time to get back there and excite Utah hockey fans. But there was a reason that he was drafted 4th above Haggins, who was the number 1 pick for majority of the year, and he went 7, as well as Porter Martone, who could probably score 40 goals a year. It's his 2-way play. So I would say that he's in the similar tier as Levshinov, Frondel, Renzel, just the same thing. And also Tej. I think like Tej Iginla is somebody that completely like fell off of the hype train on the world.
Yeah.
Whenever a player doesn't play like Kane Lindstrom, like people just forget about him. It's really interesting what recency bias does to any kind of prospect. Like if James Haggins didn't play a game last year and just like sat out, he probably still would have been the number 1 pick because recency bias was, oh, he was the number 1 pick anyway. And
Yep.
Matthew Schaefer only played 17 games. So you're going to take the Islanders guy. Like being in the space, it's always been funny because like I've always thought about this stuff where Utah Hockey Club could have taken Mitchkov and then they took Shimashev and I think Boot back to back in the draft, not back to back, but like very close together. And Mitchkov was
Mhm.
still on the board, I think, for the Shimashev pick, not Boot.
Yep.
But it was just interesting because you had somebody be like, oh, they should have taken Mitchkov. But Mitchkov had 3 years left on his contract, and he also didn't want to go to some teams. So
Yep.
people kind of forget about all that stuff going into the draft year or after like a year or 2 after. And similarly, Utah has built up an incredible prospect pool and you needed to take those upside swings. So I think Desnoyers is going to fit in for probably your 1 or 2C for a very long time, depending on what Logan Cooley does, because I think he's a star too. So like Yeah, I would say those guys are all in the same tier, kind of, just as players that could potentially be superstars as well as have that floor.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's an interesting question, right? It's kind of hard to compare Levshinov to Desnoyers, right? They're different positions, different draft years. Um, Levshinov, though, I wonder how did you feel about his decision to turn pro? I remember when I heard that he was turning pro, I thought, I would have preferred to see him go back to Michigan State. I watched him at Michigan State, and I was a big fan of Lev Shinov. I had him ranked one spot higher than TJ Ginla. I had Lev Shinov sixth overall on my list that year. He went much higher than that, and I had TJ
Too,
Ginla
yeah.
ranked seventh overall. And I liked his game at Michigan State immensely, but he seemed like to me he had more that he could have learned. He could
Mhm.
have gotten more out of college than he did. I'm sure he learned a lot in Rockford too. So I'm not sure that was a bad path, but I remember thinking, all things being equal, I would have preferred to see him return to Michigan State unless the family needed the signing bonus, right? That's a
Mhm.
possibility. I know that his family had some hardship. He had some personal tragedy, and maybe that money meant a lot to the family. So I was happy to see him get paid and turn pro. But at the same time, I thought he might have had a little bit more to prove for the Spartans. What was your reaction when he signed
Mhm.
his professional contract? And how do you think his first year as a pro went?
So I think the Blackhawks wanted him to sign a deal there. I think they wanted him in house for Rockford. And the thing that was interesting was when you were watching the interviews of the Blackhawks YouTube series, I think it's like Next Shift, like you had a couple of scouts say that he never got beat in college, which was completely untrue, as well as like
Yeah,
this guy's the next Charlie McAvoy and he never makes a mistake. And you can see that he scored 35 or tallied 35 points in 38 games. And as somebody that tries to take an unbiased opinion, even though it's very hard to, and sometimes I don't for the Blackhawks, it was kind of interesting that they had said those words about Levshunov because Levshunov was an incredible person. His personality was great. He
yeah,
was kind of like a comedian as well as a great player and a personality
hmm
guy that didn't know that he was trying to be funny. It was just that his personality was
yeah,
so great, down to earth. And that's something that the Blackhawks really want in their organization. But at the same time, I think a lot of those points that he scored in Michigan State were because he was flinging the puck at the net and he was getting lucky and a lot of secondary assists. It wasn't that he was controlling the game. It wasn't that he was, you know, the point man on the power play and just like doing everything that Lane Hudson does or being a joystick like Bo Jackson and, you know, Nintendo or whatever it was. But
yeah,
it was just like Lev Shadov was getting these points basically by being aggressive and throwing the puck to the net. It wasn't that he was driving play, so more so. And I feel like that kind of skews what we think of because you say, oh, he scored almost the same amount of points as James Haggins this year, and James Haggins was supposed to be the number one pick, playing with, Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, and because he took over the Will Smith line. And I feel like both of those players were the top players in their prospect pools for the Rangers with Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard with the Capitals, and those guys were like the gems of their team. I mean, they see it too. So when James Haggins filled in that role, you had a guy that was supposed to score a lot more points or tally. You kind of were just like, hey, do this. But he was kind of standing in the corner, like a Tony Snell, if anybody remembers that name, and was just waiting for the ball to get to him or the puck. So it's very different than how James Haggins had to steer his level of play or his game to change those guys. And to what Levshunov was doing by throwing the puck to the net and the scouts saying that he never got beat. I feel that Levshunov is a really good player and he probably should have went top 5, but going 2 overall in a draft where every game Blackhawks fans wanted to lose, majority of the Blackhawks fans that knew the prospect pool wanted to lose every game to try to get Celebrini or Demidov. I mean, yeah, Demidov. So I feel like when you have a player in your system that has come up that highly, you just think upside, 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 as well as Levshinov's floor is really good. He's a top four
Mhm.
right-handed defenseman, where you see that you guys just got JJ Peterka because you had a solid right-handed defenseman. So if Levshinov does turn into a Charlie McAvoy, he's going to be valued higher than a 100-point per game score. But the thing is, the Blackhawks have a ton of depth pieces as well as good defensive players. So why would you not take the 100-point guy that Bedard needs, as well as it would excite him? And then you have Connor Bedard calling out the name of Levshinov on the card during that draft. And I feel like a lot of people, even though it was told that we were taking, or the Blackhawks were taking Levshinov every single day for the last 30 days of that draft, that people thought maybe it was going to be Demidov. So I feel like there was a lot of mistakes that happened during that class, as well as I think it goes back to Korchinski, because Rinzel gave us a top right-handed defenseman, and I think it was like a free pick because you were taking a upside swing at 25 after getting back into the first round because of the Mrazek trade. You took Mrazek and also got the 25th pick for the 38th pick for the Leafs. So when you look at the value, you did really good. So then that was in the Korchinski draft, and Korchinski is probably not a top 10 pick in a redraft. So you were trying to help out Korchinski as well as get right-handed defenseman depth when you already had right-handed defensemen. And I feel that Levshinov was probably not the best defenseman in that class when it's all said and done, as well as production. So I don't think he should have went to the NHL because he wasn't ready regardless, as well as the AHL. But I think it's going to help him this season that he went to the AHL, because then there was just going to be similar mistakes. But I feel like if there was a reason why Levshinov didn't go back to Michigan State, is because I feel like there might have been somewhere in the scouting department where the Blackhawks might have been a little scared that he wasn't going to be able to repeat his point per game totals, and then Blackhawks fans would have been like, "Oh, you didn't pick the right guy." So I think it's
Oh,
exciting to get a guy there, because a lot of the points that he got are not projectable. But I think that he had an incredible first 9 games. I think that he showed a lot of what he could do against the Colorado game when he first came in the first time. He played incredible. He was one of the best players on the Blackhawks. So I feel like it's just you have a guy with a lot of upside and who's going to be a really good player. I don't know if he's going to be a star, but he's definitely going to be a really good player. So you can't really go wrong with that. And I think that the only knock is Demidov, because the other players aren't really doing well. Or like Seneca was not supposed to go that high. Kane Lindstrom lost his whole draft year, or draft plus 1 year, because of injury. So they made a really good pick. I think it would have been like 3 in a redraft, and the Ducks would have taken Levshinov anyway. But I don't think that they should have brought him up to the AHL that quickly, and as well as the NHL. But he did good while he played there.
yeah, he did seem to rise to the challenge, right? I didn't see Rockford games, so I'm not
Mhm.
exactly sure how he did on the farm, but his production looked good. I did, I don't want to underrate him either. I'm a big fan of Lev Shinov. I did have him sixth overall, right? So
Yeah.
that says he's a good player. At MSU, I saw flashes and maybe some consistency issues. There was a lot of
Mhm.
times where it looked like his controller came unplugged and he just kind of drifted. You know what I mean? So to say he was mistake free is maybe a little rich, but definitely a ton of upside and a prospect any team would be thrilled to have. Someone who I would still probably give the slight edge to over Tej Ginla, because Tej didn't get to play much, and I already had Lev Shinov a spot higher than him on their draft list. When it comes to Lev Shinov versus Desnoyers, that's a tough call. I think as a Mammoth fan, I'd probably stick with my guy Desnoyers, but I wouldn't fault the
Mhm.
Hawks for sticking with Lev Shinov there in terms of a ranking. I think with Caleb Desnoyers, the closer comp and the more interesting conversation would be him against Frondel. I did have Desnoyers higher than Frondel on my final rankings. I had Frondel seventh, and I had Desnoyers third on my final rankings. What were your thoughts on Desnoyers versus Frondel headed into the draft, and how do you rank them now?
Well, my first 2 scouting reports back in like last June, where it was actually Frondel and Desnoyers. So it was actually really funny because I was a big fan of Frondel a lot more than what he performed in his -1 year, because the thing about it was that he had 3 straight injuries and kind of looked slow going out of those injuries, and he was supposed to be a top 3 pick anyway before. I think that
Hmm.
Matthew Schaefer was the one on the outside looking into the top 5, and then he obviously went 1. So draft rankings, probably not in this class because McKenna and Verhoff, but you never really know where people are going to end. Like James Haggins was the number 1 pick and then went to the Bruins at 7. So the thing about both of those players is Desnoyers always had the upside, but the knock on him was that he was playing in the Q, and the
Yeah.
Q continues to do really well in the Mem Cup. So I don't know kind of why there's this notion that the Q is worse, and you're seeing the CHL teams losing a lot of players as well as like the USHL to NCAA now. You're seeing a lot of the top players get that NIL money as well as that you get more practices, so you don't have to play. You don't have the mileage playing all those games. But I think the Q is actually a league that is now underrated. When you go to the Mem Cup and you
Hmm.
see the Q teams playing very well, it's basically like how Porter Martone went to the men's world, and then scored and showed that his skating wasn't really like going to affect him at the higher end level. And it's kind of similar. Like when you watch these Holinka Gretzky tournaments and you see Canada on paper, and then USA was beating up on them in the first 2 periods. I know it was 3-2 lastly because I didn't get to watch the end. But the thing is, it's like on paper, you can look at a roster and be like, oh, those guys are way better. But when you actually look at the level of play, or what's actually going on, I think that it's a little different. So in the queue, there might not be a lot of players that are going to stand out on a like stat sheet and be like, oh, this guy's a superstar. But at the end of the day, like that's why I think Desnoyers went for. I think that Carbonneau, who had probably the best shot in the entire draft, went
Yeah.
19 to St. Louis, and then you had Bill Zonin go
Deal.
20. Yeah. So and then you had Bill Zonin, and all 3 of those players were Q players. You had 3 in the top 25. So I feel like that's a league that is very underrated, and they're always going to have really good players. But the superstar aspects, or the superstar players that have that skill and those traits, they're going to beat up on some of the guys no matter what league you're in, because there's going to be guys that are always probably not at the same level as you are. So I
Yeah.
feel that like Desnoyers and Frondel played in 2 completely different leagues, where you had them in the SHL
Hmm.
playing against men for Frondel, and you had Desnoyers playing in the Q, but they got drafted back to back. So obviously scouts see them very similarly. I think that I would say Desnoyers might have a touch more upside as a 2-way center, as similarly as a pure center playmaker. But I think Frondel definitely has more offensive ability, as well as he has the second best shot in the entire draft, probably to
Yeah.
Desnoyers. If you're going to set him up with an office, not a corner office like Ovi had, like I have said, but like you give him like a nice office that he can just give Bedard some space, especially on the power play, and feed him the puck. I know that Lev Shinov, Rinzel, and Korchinski are all going to look for those guys if they're all on the power play, because Frondel just has that incredible shot. And I think that the thing about Frondel was that he wasn't play driving. So you put Frondel in the league like the Q, I think he will show that he can play drive a little more because he
Yes.
doesn't need to. But Victor Eklund was play driving his line majority of the year. So I think that this like a knock on Frondel is that he did have somebody like Victor Eklund on his line. I think that if we're going to talk about knocking James Haggins for having Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard, then you have to knock Frondel for having Victor Eklund with his stats a little bit. But I think both players are in that superstar potential tier, as well as have high floors. So I feel like they're no brainer picks. I think James Haggins might have a little more playmaking upside and vision, but his floor wasn't as high. And I think that's why you see him fall. James Haggins can't play 3C or 4C. If he plays that, that
Right.
means he was kind of a bust in the eyes of scouts. But I think that if like you have Frondel is like an Anton Lundell line, and you play him on the third line, not because of the talent level, just because you're stacked. I think that he actually can play at that level. Same with Norier.
Yeah.
But I do think that they're both going to be 1 or 2 C's, or the versatility of both of them playing on the wing. Because a lot of people don't know this, but Norier had a 62% faceoff percentage this year, but he played majority of wing this year because of those wrist injuries. He couldn't take the
Yep.
faceoffs. So he does have that versatility. So I think both guys are in the exact same like spot. But the only reason I
Yeah.
had Levchinov there was because of trade value. You're seeing what top forward right-handed defensemen are going for right now in the open market. And I think that Levchinov's floor is top 4. So his upside is top defenseman on your team. Um, I think that if say I know Atlanta or there's going to be 34 teams, and there's not going to be 34 right-handed defensemen that are in the same tier as Levchinov. So he would be a
Right.
top right-handed defenseman on a team, and I think that that's the only reason I have them over there. But Caleb Desnoyers is a top 10 prospect probably in the entire NHL. He is a list top prospect. You can get majority of superstars that are on heavy AAVs on a rebuilding team or whatever it is, a bottom 15 team for Caleb Desnoyers. He is a potential superstar. So I feel like Utah fans are loaded with, especially their 23U players. Every player on that roster majority can be a star. We go to Cooley, Gunther, Paterka, Iginla, Shemishev, Boot. Most of those guys have superstar potential. If it's not like over 50%, it's still around there. So I feel like Desnoyers was the perfect fit for Utah, and Frondell was the perfect fit for the Blackhawks because they're both
Totally agree.
guys that have
Yeah.
that upside with that floor.
Totally agree. Yeah, completely. And Utah's got so many shooters coming up, with
Yeah.
Gunther, Paterka, Ginla, Boot, that, maybe getting somebody like Desnoyers who could maybe be a little bit more of a two-way guy and a distributor and more of a cerebral player, I think was a great fit. Whereas Frondell provides some versatility and some scoring assurance for Chicago. Both have great B games. Both are great prospects. I had Desnoyers, a few spots ahead, but it was razor thin there. If Desnoyers went third and Frondell went fourth, I wouldn't have batted an eyelash. I would have thought great picks by both teams. And the fact that it went in the reverse order, I think everybody's happy. So I think, as we start to look at the pools, the 1 and 2 of Levchinov and Frondell versus the 1 and 2 of Desnoyers and Iginla, pretty razor thin there. I think that when you go to number 3 on your list, who's Sam Rinzel, he's a standout number 3, especially with Utah having on my list Daniil Boot and Dmitry Shemishev 3 and 4. You having Sam Rinzel and Sasha Boisvert 3 and 4 on your list. Why don't you tell Utah fans who may not be all that tuned into what Sam Rinzel has? I mean, you've touched on him a couple of times, but can you give us a quick rundown on Sam Rinzel and where he fits into the future for Chicago?
Yeah, Sam Rinzel has the potential to be the best defensive player on the Blackhawks. And it's because of his upside. It's because of his floor. He was drafted as a high school player, and he only increased his upside, which we don't normally see. And he's a towering defenseman. And the thing is, he has incredible offensive skill as well as his playmaking and his vision. And he kind of plays like Keaton Verhoff a little bit. And I'm not saying that is any downside to like Verhoff. I'm saying it because of like, I think Verhoff could potentially give McKenna a little run for his money. I think it's like a 3% chance that he's the number 1 pick. I think McKenna is like a 97% chance at being the number 1 pick just because. But if we're talking about like Rinzel in a draft, like a redraft, I think he'd go top 5, maybe top 4, top 3. I don't know what it is, but Rinzel is an incredible player. I think that just based on draft value, if Rinzel was drafted where Korchinski was, he'd have a lot more hype basically in the NHL. And a lot of guys like take a long time. And when you draft a high school player, it's basically like a mystery box, like on Family Guy. Like it could be a boat or it could be keys to a boat. And it is what it is. Like Rinzel was that mystery box. The Blackhawks obviously hit really well. Same with Nazar.
Yes.
But it was just like one of those things that you can't really recoup that. Like it's not like a Lane Hudson thing where most people that were scouting knew Lane Hudson was good and shouldn't have went 62 overall, but he did because of his size. He should have never went in that range. Rinzel probably shouldn't have even went at 25. I think he should have went like 30s plus because
Yeah.
Rinzel wasn't as polished a prospect. He probably should have went in that 38 range, which the Leafs gave to the Blackhawks for like 25 and Mrazek for 38, which is always funny when the Blackhawks continue to do this. They get a player that they need as well as a higher draft pick because of the money. And I think that Utah had, or the Arizona Coyotes had done a really good job at doing that too, but now they're going to contention. So the thing about like Rinzel and Boisvert is they both have absurd upside. I think Boisvert
Mhm.
probably is going to be like one of the best 3Cs in the entire NHL, just because you're going to have Bedard, Nazar, and Frondel all fighting for 2C, as well as Oliver Moore. But I think Oliver Moore is probably not going to be a center anymore, just because of the Blackhawks system depth. But you have three guys that have two spots, and then one of them is going to be sent out to the wing, which I think Frondel would be a better center, just because you don't want two under 6 foot centers to be your top two centers. But also,
Right.
Frondel said that he would want to be whatever position Bedard's not. So you have Boisvert sitting there at 3C, and I feel like that would be a really good play for him. He's going to Boston next year, Boston University, and I feel like that's a really good fit for him. He's going to be like Rinzel's going to be playing in the NHL next year. Probably he's going to be one of the best players in the Blackhawks. I know that Frank Saravalli said that like Rinzel reminds him of Brock Faber, and I really do like that. But I also think that Brock has a higher floor but lower ceiling than Sam Rinzel. I think that Sam Rinzel has a higher ceiling just because like what he can do offensively.
Mhm.
I think Sam Rinzel is going to make a lot of people think like, how did we not draft him? I think Dmitry Shemishev actually has very similar skill as well, and I think that they're two different players stylistically, but they're both really good. Like Shemishev is a really good player. I was talking to Steven Ellis at the draft about this, like as well as Russ Cohen and Shane Malloy from SiriusXM NHL Prospects. They love Shemishev, so I feel like Shemishev is one of those guys that you don't really know what he's going to be yet, but that's very similar to Renzel. You have that floor though. So I feel like it's going to be really fun for both of these franchises because they have that guy that you don't really know what he's going to be, but he has like the sky's the limit potential wise. So I'm really excited to watch both of them next season. I think Renzel probably has a lot more upside in terms of offensive upside, but I think eh, but Shimashev has all world, all around upside too. So they're both really good players, and I feel like that it one these two teams have like two of the top prospect pools in the entire NHL, like two of the top seven. I don't know where it would be, but like I could say from everything, it's in the top seven of both of them. So they've done an incredible job drafting really good players, and system fits.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, and I agree with it. Renzel has like massive offensive upside, and
Mhm.
I'm not gonna lie, man. I I didn't see it when he was a USHL player. I wasn't sure about that pick, and I am
Yeah.
very, very surprised about his steep development curve. And he looks like a can't miss at this point, which came pretty much out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Dmitry Simashev was a surprise pick at sixth overall,
Mhm.
but he was a top 10 pick, which people maybe didn't really expect, but the draft pedigree is higher. I would agree. I don't think he has the shot that Renzel has. And I think that his lack of credible shot threat kind of limits his overall offensive game on the power play, whereas Renzel can be a threat with the man advantage and has a little bit more upside there. But as big and bad as Renzel is, I think Simashev is even bigger and even
Mhm.
badder. So he brings that kind of real physical snarl to the table that maybe Renzel doesn't have. So they're different players, but really high caliber players. Daniil Boot and Sasha Boisvert, again, kind of good comparables in terms of the fact that they're both forwards, both in the top five of their respective teams' prospect pool. Boot has a lot of offensive upside as a dual threat, pass shoot, hit. He was a brutal player in the MHL when it comes to physicality and just being a big bully. He's a 6'7", 6'8", the GM likes to say player. We'll see where he actually stacks up size-wise, but he's huge. Meanwhile, Boisvert has that really great 3C potential that you mentioned. So
Mhm.
again, things are pretty even here in the top five. My fifth rated guy is Maverick Lamoureux. You've got Oliver Moore. there. So, again, these are players who, Maverick Lamoureux had a great impact in the NHL, a good first season in the AHL, did again miss time with injury, which has been a bit of a theme for him. Oliver Moore's theme has been more of a guy who kind of gets lost in the shuffle at a really good NTDP program, again, at a really good Gophers program, and then now in Chicago's prospect pool. I mean, Oliver Moore to me seems like a really great prospect who really has just been a guy who's always had tremendous depth ahead of him, and that's been his big challenge. Anything you wanted to add to that for either Lamoureux or Moore?
Yeah, I think this is kind of where the Blackhawks have the depth of any prospect pool on here, is because like the Blackhawks graduated Bedard, Nazar, and Korchinski, and Oliver Moore is still sixth on their list. And it was because like if you look at how many first round picks the Blackhawks have had, they had 3 in 2022, they had 2 in 2023, 3 in 2024, and then 3 in 2025. You just can't like beat that. And like Vanacker isn't even on this list.
Yeah.
Where he probably should be, but the only thing
Yeah.
is like um I'm a big Nathan Bame guy, and I feel like the offensive skill at 6'2" is just like where you need to put your eggs in your basket there. But you have a lot of Blackhawks picks where they're in the first round because I think they hit on a lot of
Hmm.
these picks. The only ones are like Nestrasil and West are two really good upside plays, and I feel like Moore is that guy where he was probably the fastest skater in the Blackhawks prospect pool immediately. He was the best skater in the entire class. He put up better than McDavid numbers skating wise, which nobody does because McDavid is a generational skater, which we haven't seen. I think Oliver Moore is also. But the only problem with that is he's such a good skater, like McDavid level, generational, like Wayne Gretzky esque type of skill trait where it's nobody else has it, but why are you not producing more? Why have you not put it all together? Can your brain think as fast as your feet? Can you continue to get breakout passes and from your defense? Is it because of the lack of? But you had Sam Renzel back there, and the Golden Gophers are continuously like getting recruits on defense. They have two more, and Jacob Rombach, who's one of my favorite players. I actually owed him mint, like a what was it? Raspberry mint chocolate raspberry chip ice cream if he would have went to the Blackhawks because we had a little side bet as well as they have Maceo Phillips, who's coming there, who are two top 6'6" players who are both right-handed and left-handed. So not both, but you get both of them on the side. So they're going to be an incredible pair if they do play together. So the Golden Gophers are continuously restockpiling defensemen, and Renzel wasn't the
Hmm.
only one. And then you had Jimmy Snuggeroo and a lot of players that I can name. Like it's just like they had so many good players on that team. Why didn't Oliver Moore cook more? Why was he not the best player on their team? I know they had Logan Cooley for a little, but their careers didn't overlap at Minnesota. So I was just a little bit surprised why Moore didn't do more, no pun intended, but it was just like a little interesting why his stats weren't like he's scoring so many points. But he did do a good job in the NCAA level. You could tell that physicality going into the NHL might be a little bit of an issue because his first couple games he was getting
Yeah.
pushed around, but he did not falter. It's not like he is going to sit around there, take the hits. He is like he looked like a gym rat when we were watching those videos when the Blackhawks were putting him out, but he's just a very skinny frame. It's kind of hard to put muscle on unless and not hurt your speed. So he probably has like a thought process like I need to keep my speed and my skating and as good as it can be, but also gain muscle. And that's a hard balance to do. And I think that Blackhawks fans and his trainers and his people around him are probably all thinking the same thing. But I think that Oliver Moore is one of those guys that's going to overcome having to get bigger and play bigger because he's 6 foot, but he's very, very like he's not beefed up at all. But I just feel like Oliver Moore is one of the best players in this prospect pool just based on he has the best trade out of anybody in this prospect pool. I think that Connor Bedard's shot was generational. Oliver Moore has generational skating. And it was his breakout speed, his explosiveness, his elusiveness. I think he does get caught up a little bit, like watching the puck, and he needs to think at a higher rate. But he's a really good playmaker, and his hockey IQ is pretty high in regard or because of that. It's not like it's gonna hurt him. So really do like Oliver Moore there. Like
And
Korchinski
that's
is
an
somebody too,
interesting
but
that's an interesting foil there, right? Talking
mm,
about Oliver Moore's game, who it didn't really take that big next step that you wanted to see it for a first rounder, returning to the same team, and maybe you want to see a little bit more. Cole Baudouin, first round
mm,
pick for Utah, not this last draft, but the one before. Same deal. He went back to Barry Colts, and his production didn't really shoot way up. It went up per game a little bit higher, but it didn't take that huge step that you wanted. And he's kind of the opposite of Moore, where he could not be more jacked. Like the dude
mhm.
is stacked, but his foot speed's a little bit low. And he's a guy who, like Moore, maybe hangs onto the puck, isn't making those heads up plays that you'd want to see. Cole Baudouin kind of gets rid of it a little bit too quick. So they have similar things that they need to work on in terms of overall work that needs to be done, but it's kind of opposite things in many ways because he's already a monster of a human being. He's just got to work on his quickness. So again, a little bit more parity as you look through these two prospect pools, where we continue as we work our way down, seeing prospects who maybe aren't similar players, but have similar groupings of strengths and weaknesses, or similar overall caliber in terms of upside or likelihood to hit. So as we work our way down the list, I'm seeing that we're pretty even Steven across the board in a lot of different ways.
Mm.
Meanwhile, the Blackhawks are going to continue to add to this prospect pool in a big way, whereas Utah's is starting to dry up in terms of what they're going to be adding in terms of upside. One position we haven't touched on yet is goaltending. Utah's got Michael Robel is their big goaltending prospect. I believe that Chicago took Gahan Guyan right ahead of Robel, maybe a couple spots
Yeah,
before.
35th
Um,
overall. Yep.
do you want to talk a little bit about Chicago's goaltending of the future? Which players in the system now or on the team now are going to be a part of it, and what your thoughts are overall on goaltending?
Well, when I look at goaltending, I want to look at anyone that's under 25 over like age wise, because I feel like that's you can get 7, 8, 9 years, and I think goalies take a lot longer. So I
Mhm.
wanted Michael Robel. I think that I thought he was on the Sharks for the longest time, and I found that out last week because for some reason I was having conversations with Sharks people, and I was always bringing him up, and no one would ever be like, "Who is that?" And I would just thought he was on the team because the Blackhawks took Guyan, and then their top goalie prospect is actually Drew Commesso, but the future of the Blackhawks goalies is probably Spencer Knight, who is one of the best goalie prospects we've ever seen come out, and he had 2 Stanley Cups under his belt now. But the thing was, he didn't win any of them because Bob was the best goalie we've ever seen in playoff runs. Not best that we've ever seen because I don't want people to come after me, but I'm just saying, like, I think Guyan has that. I can win you a playoff series. I don't see any goalie kind of have a lot of that. But the thing is, he's not consistent. If it's a regular season game, I have no idea what's going to happen. If it's a playoff game, I'm taking Guyan because I feel like that guy's going to win it for me. I have no idea why. It's just like he plays better when the lights get brighter. A lot of goalies don't. He does. In international tournaments, that guy looks like he's Martin Brodeur. Like, it does not make sense. But if you put him back on like the Green Bay Gamblers, who are giving up 4 goals a game anyway because they're giving up 70 shots, yeah, he's going to look bad. His save percentage was not good. It was under 900. And it continued to look like he was getting worse and worse. But what a lot of people don't understand was the Blackhawks wanted him to be in the Green Bay Gamblers because they knew he was
Mm.
going to take a lot of shots. They wanted just him to get reps. And I'll talk about like one goalie prospect, or not a goalie prospect because it's not a name, but when a goalie goes to the NCAA, I kind of like get scared a little bit. And this was something me and Rocco and Darren from the Brunker Boys have talked about. you might get 8 or 9 or 10 games before December. If you're in the OHL or the CHL or the USHL, you're getting a lot more games. You're getting 60 plus games played by your team, and you can get 40, 35 of those or whatever it is. I think that prospects need as many live games as possible, because it's like, say you want to go into broadcasting and you are trying to figure out how you're supposed to improve. It's just about live games. It's the same thing with goalies. I think it's the most important position to get as many live shots as possible. So I feel like as a goalie, you want your defense to be great for statistics reasons. But if you're the worst defense in the league and you're getting 40, 50 shots a game, that's actually good. So yeah, the Blackhawks took Guyan, and it's probably not looking good. And I think that the Utah Hockey Club or the Utah Mammoths took Robble, but they could have also taken Fowler. I think Fowler probably was the best goalie in that class. I've heard a lot about like Russ Cohen's story where he had to do an interview on a napkin with him. Like he was always somebody that I really liked. And I know like Grav was big on him, a YouTuber,
Hmm.
does really good work. Like he was very high on him for like 3 months before. So obviously I liked Robble a lot more than Guyan at the time. If people forget, Guyan was actually the goalie that got dismantled against Bedard in overtime. If you
Hmm.
were, I think it was the World Juniors, there was some tournament, but it
Yep.
was international, and Connor Bedard walked through 3 or 4 different people, and just it was the best dangle I've ever seen. So Guyan was actually the guy that was the Slovak goalie for that.
Hmm.
And I have actually liked watching Adam Guyan, but I do think that the future then is Spencer Knight, and I think the future is Drew Comesso for his 1A, 1B. And I think Guyan is just that like kind of dark horse mystery box. But I think the Utah Mammoth have an incredible goalie in Michael Robble. I think that he
Yeah.
is somebody that you guys got to steal with. I think he should have been taken probably in the first round, but dropped all the way to, I think, like the late, what was it, late 30s or
38.
okay,
38. Yeah.
38. So it was 3 picks right after, and then there was kind of a run on goalies after anyway. So
Hmm.
you guys got an incredible goalie. I can't say enough about him. He was one of the reasons why I didn't understand why the Sharks took Ravensbergen, but obviously it's because they didn't have him. So I felt really stupid. But yeah, you guys got a really good goalie.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I like Robble too. But I'd say future of goaltending positions still got to kind of give the edge to the Blackhawks. I mean, with Spencer Knight and Drew Comesso and Guyan is kind of the nice to have in that group.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn good. We have Karel Vejmelka, who played phenomenally in Utah, but prior to last season, it always been kind of a roller coaster throughout his career. So we signed him to a longer term extension, but he's a guy in his late 20s who we'll see what we get with Karel Vejmelka, whether or not he's going to be the man for the next 10 years or not. We have Robble coming up, and things are maybe a little thin overall. Melker Thelin we have, and some others who are kind of bit parts. So I think if it's Robble versus Guyan, I'm taking Robble all day, obviously. But if it's Vejmelka and Robble versus Knight, Comesso, and Guyan, probably edge to Blackhawks there. So I think where the Blackhawks really start to run away from Utah is when we get into the under 23, and you guys get to start adding in Bedard and Korchinski and some other guys there.
Yeah.
Obviously Chicago has some really, really big weapons there with Nazar and Bedard up against Utah's Cooley and Gunther and Paterka. So once again, kind of a shootout there. Connor Bedard's a guy who put up, points in the 60s his first couple of seasons. I think if you believe the hype train, you might have thought maybe he'd be putting up more points. With Chicago being where Chicago was in the wins and loss column and the supporting cast he had around him, I don't personally hold anything against him. I still think that he's the A+ phenomenal blue chip prospect that everybody said he was, even if his numbers haven't quite jumped off the page yet. What would you want to tell Utah fans about what we can look forward to in this rivalry as these two teams come up together in the Central Division? When we're looking at these teams in 5 years, what's your case for Chicago being ahead of Utah and being the better team out of the two?
Yeah, I think that like you put a generational talent on the Blackhawks, it obviously is going to lift them up in a discussion like this for U23. But you also have to look at like Logan Cooley, Gunther, Paterka. The Blackhawks don't have anyone that is close to those guys. So, yeah, okay. So I would say Nazar and Cooley are close. Based on if you haven't watched Frank Nazar, you're probably going to be like, "That what is he talking about?" And Cooley put up like his point totals are incredible, but I would just say Nazar and Cooley are close to each other, but there's nobody for Paterka or Gunther. And I think um like Paterka was a player that the Blackhawks really wanted. They really wanted him, and I feel like the Sabres just gave him up for a price where the Blackhawks could have, picked. So I would say, yeah, that is one that I was a little surprised about, but I would give the edge kind of to Utah here, but Bedard is going to be close to that because a lot of the Blackhawks' good prospects are in their prospect pool, and a lot of the good Utah players are in their U23. So it's just kind of different. Where if Paterka was on the Blackhawks, you'd give the edge to Paterka, but the Blackhawks don't have anyone that's like Paterka. So yeah.
And we're back after some major technical difficulties there. Looks like my internet just decided that 1 hour worth of podcast was enough, and we're just gonna stop right there. So, yeah, man, some generational talents with the Chicago Blackhawks. Utah is going to have to kind of stack pieces together, I think, and do it more by committee. So it'll be interesting to see how the different rebuilds go as we progress through the years here, and the Central Division gets even tighter with these young up and comers taking the baton from some of the older teams in the division who are probably going to head the other direction before too long. So, yeah, from a prospect pool and an under 23 pool, I mean, with Chicago having a talent like Bedard being the great equalizer, I think the edge probably goes to them. But taking Bedard out of the equation, I think things are pretty darn close. Of course, Chicago has another opportunity this season to really change the equation, pick up somebody like Gavin McKenna or some other elite talent, whereas Utah's going to be picking a little bit later in the draft, probably, if all goes well this season. But Anthony, I really appreciate you making the time to have this prospect debate with me, this future face-off. I appreciate the bright future there in Chicago, and I definitely encourage any Utah Mammoth fan to follow the prospect on X, on social, and especially on YouTube, and look for Anthony on all of your favorite prospect podcasts because he's going to be on them. So anything you wanted to add?
Thank you so much for having me. Definitely like and subscribe to Clean Hits Hockey Podcast. It's an incredible podcast. You guys have great guests. Yeah, if you guys want to come over to my channels, I'm on TikTok, YouTube, X, all at the Prospect On, as well as I have some incredible prospects coming on. I got like Ivar Stenberg, Landon DuPont,
Oh,
Adam Valentini, Daxon Rudolph, who's been awesome.
yeah.
I know that like he's going to be a top 10 pick. Tynan Lawrence is going to be coming on. I'm also
Top
going to
10
be doing
pick.
something soon with Chris Peters, who's one of my favorites. So
Yep.
I'm really excited. Next week I get to talk to him. So yeah, just have a lot of people on, like social media guests or players and prospects. So definitely check it out over there. And thank you guys all for all the support you guys have showed me for this last like 8 months. It's been awesome. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, check out everything that the Don's got going, all things prospects. So if
Yeah.
you're a Utah Mammoth fan and you want to get a little deeper understanding of the game and take it to the next level and be a draft nut like us, you can't find a better resource than the Prospect Don. All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, and until next time, man. I really appreciate it. See ya.